Don't forget their better be. Yeah. That's a new one for me for sure.
Yeah. All right, so the board meeting is now called to order for the special board executive committee meeting. Ms. Bo, are there any commissioners joining the meeting under AB 2449?
No commissioners joining under AB 2449.
All right, the next item is the meeting notes from the May 2nd joint committee meeting of the executive and budget and finance committee. Are there any deletions or changes from commissioners? Seeing none, moving on to the next item. Ms. Bo, are there any public comments?
No public comments on this item.
Our next,
I'm sorry, we'll receive and file the meeting notes as well.
okay, thank you. Our next item is the annual audit entrance that will be led by Raul and Canali. With that, I will hand this off to Raul.
Thank you, Commissioner McBride. Good afternoon, committee members. As part of our year-end process for wrapping up fiscal year 2024-2025, as part of the audit requirements, our auditor, I. Bailey, is required to come and meet with you to meet some required audit communications. With this, I'd like to introduce Canali Sakosian, who is a partner with I. Bailey. She's been with us for several years as the lead partner, as part of the first 5 LA audit. Canali, take it
All right.
away.
Thanks, Raul. Let me share my screen. And can everyone see that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. Let's get started. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for letting me participate in this meeting. Let me get into it. So I'm here to discuss the planned scope for the fiscal year 2025 audit. We are contracted to perform the audit of First 5 LA's annual comprehensive financial report. In addition, we'll also test First 5 LA's compliance with the standards and procedures for audits of local entities administering the California Children and Families Act issued by the California State Controller's Office. So our responsibility as the auditor is to perform an audit in accordance with U.S. generally accepted auditing standards and also governmental auditing standards. At the conclusion of our audit, we will express opinions about whether the financial statements, which are prepared by management, are fairly presented in all material respects. The opinion provides reasonable but not absolute assurance. The audit does not relieve management of its responsibilities to ensure the financial statements are fairly stated. In addition, at the conclusion of the audit, we will also provide our report on the compliance with the Act. Okay. So our audit will also entail obtaining an understanding of First 5 LA's operating environment, including its internal controls, in order to assess the risk of material misstatements to the financial statements, and also to design the nature, timing, and extent of our further audit procedures. As part of our audit planning, we've identified management override as an area more susceptible to risk. We have also identified audit procedures to address this risk. We will not opine on the internal controls. However, if there are any deficiencies or weaknesses identified as part of the audit, we will report those out to you. So at the conclusion of our audit, we will communicate the following: what the qualitative aspects of First 5 LA's accounting policies were, any significant estimates used to prepare the financial statements and note disclosures. We will also report if there are any difficulties encountered during the course of the audit, any uncorrected misstatements, any material corrected misstatements, and any disagreements that we have with management. Lastly, we'll also identify if there are any consultations management had with any external auditing firm. So as far as our timing, we are currently in our planning and interim phase of the audit. And then our final fieldwork is scheduled for August, and we plan to issue the final reports in October. Our approach for the planning and the risk assessment phase is to obtain an understanding of First 5 LA, identify what the audit risks are, and to determine what controls there are at the organization in order to develop our audit plan. In addition, we'll also focus on key business cycles at First 5 LA, which are revenue generation, the cash disbursements and contracting, payroll, HR, and also design our controls to test over these processes. During this phase, we'll also start our compliance testing. At the final phase of the audit, that's after First 5 LA has closed its trial balance and the numbers are finalized. In this phase, we'll test the balances that are used to support the financial statement numbers. We'll also review the journal entries that are recorded and any significant accounting policies used, and also if there are any significant estimates used by management to prepare the financial statements. We'll also reach out to legal counsel to determine if there are any contingencies that need to be disclosed and consider if there are any subsequent events that would be useful to the readers of the financial statements. At our exit, we'll also discuss any proposed audit adjustments, whether there are any deficiencies or findings, and whether or not if we had any recommendations that we identified as during the course of the audit. So those are the items that we'll communicate to those in charge of governance at the conclusion of the audit. So the last thing that I wanted to highlight is there is one new accounting pronouncement that will be effective this year, and that's GASB Statement 101 related to compensated absences. So management is currently working on the impact of this implementation. So there could or could not be a restatement to the financial statements based on this implementation. So we wanted to communicate that just in case you saw a restatement later on during the final report. So with that, that concludes my presentation. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer any of them.
Do commissioners have any questions or comments? Ms. Miller, are there any public comments?
Confirming there are no public comments.
Well,
Just real quick, so as Kanali mentioned, we are in the planning phase. I want to introduce to you our new senior staff accountant, Raj Kumar. He joined us a little bit under a year ago. And he will be taking the lead on the fiscal year 24-25 audit.
is there anything else?
That's it.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Kanali.
Thank you.
Our last item on the agenda is the proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26 and the long-term financial plan led by JR, Raul, and Daisy. With that, I will hand this over to JR.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner McBride. Definitely want to keep this in context before we get in there, and I'll keep it brief. If you recall, last October, we went over recommendations with the long-term financial plan, which we call the LTFP on there. And part of that recommendation was guided by 3 guiding principles, but more importantly, the one guiding principle that kind of drove everything was in our environment of declining revenue, we wanted to have consistency and stability to get to a $60 million organization. So it's about consistency and stability for that. So with that, the board did approve the LTFP that had a step-down approach from a $80 million organization to eventually a $60 million organization in fiscal year 27-28 for that. So I just wanted to remind the board members and commissioners about that because a lot of those recommendations were used to inform our budget, which you'll see in a moment. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Raul and Daisy to go through the budget.
Thank you, JR. So obviously today's objective is really to go through our budget process and really highlight the different components around our budget, around our programs and the support cost, and dive a little bit into our administrative cost limit. And then we will move on to our long-term financial plan and provide you an update. But before we move on to the actual presentation, as JR mentioned, our long-term plan, financial plan, set a goal for us to become a $60 million organization by 27, 28. We get there through a step-down approach that begins this next fiscal year in 25, 26. Board approved in the long-term financial plan, the board did approve the first step down to be $80 million of our investment. And this will mark the first year of the plan. The $80 million budget that you see before you is fully aligned within the approved limit. It actually comes in a little bit lower than our $80 million investment limit. I also want to talk about some of the changes that we have made in this year's budget. The changes that we made it's more to the structure and to the format. And the new format, I believe, really simplifies the budget by eliminating that operating category, which previously blurred the distinction between our program and our administrative costs. By transitioning to a program versus an admin budget structure, it does provide a more accurate, transparent, and mission-aligned view of how our resources are allocated. This change does eliminate confusion around direct and indirect costs, and it supports a clear communication to our stakeholders and better aligns with board oversight expectations. It now clearly presents the total cost of program, including personnel and supplies and the services related to our program delivery, making it easier for the board to see what resources are really going directly to mission-related work. Also, for the first time in this year's budget, we have implemented a time survey to better understand how staff allocates their work across programmatic and administrative functions. This marks a shift in how we calculate our administrative rate. And rather than relying on assumptions or broad estimates, the time survey does provide data-informed approach in how we calculate our admin rate, giving us a more accurate picture of the true cost of delivering our programs. This not only improves transparency, but also ensures that we're aligning our resources more precisely with our mission. Please note that these changes continue to honor our organization's fiscal policy, and most importantly, it aligns to First Five California Fiscal Management Guide and aligns with best practices with entities such as the county department and other organizations and philanthropic. Most importantly, it promotes an easier understanding for our external partners, stakeholders, including funders and auditors, who may be interested in funding any of our programs or partnering with us. I also want to note in full transparency that today's version is different than the version that we're taking to the board tomorrow. The numbers are not changing. Everything lines up when it comes to the numbers. What has changed in today's version versus tomorrow's version are some minor changes or edits to how we articulate how some of our funding is being spent or being funded. And it's more about the methodology or who's getting our resources. Pretty much just in plain speak, we did a scan of what was in our budget narrative, and we wanted to make sure we created the most flexibility to who we partner with and not call specific partners out, so that we can be transparent and really look at who's the best candidate for the work. So with that being said, we're going to go into the budget presentation, and then from there, we will transition to the long-term financial plan, which I'll have some additional remarks related to our long-term financial plan. Daisy?
All right, let's jump in, starting off with the budget process overview.
The fiscal year 25-26 budget was guided by the long-term financial plan and our fiscal reality. The proposed budget aligns to the $80 million spending limit that was established through the LTFP. This represents a roughly 12.8% decrease compared to the 24-25 mid-year revised budget of $91.7 million. So this budget, similar to previous years, was developed based on an analysis of historical spending, projected expenditures, multi-year contracted funding, and anticipated need that aligns to our fiscal reality and the LTFP. Program resources were configured to align to the 2024-2029 strategic plan organizational structure. That is the new department configuration that was established last year. Additionally, this year we are beginning to pivot to a slightly different approach, as Raul mentioned, to how we present our operational costs. We are reframing the cost from operating budget costs to support costs, and this encompasses both the administrative costs that we present annually, as well as the program support costs, including staff salaries, benefits, and general operational needs. The purpose of this revised approach is again to fully convey the true comprehensive costs of operating our programs and executing the respective activities. So in general, our resources included in this year's proposed budget include our continued advancement toward long-term sustainability. One example of this is the approximately $7.6 million in restricted external funding that we are anticipating from partners to offset expenditures in next year's budget. Another example is that the proposed budget also ensures that activities that have completed their objectives are appropriately ramped down and phased out consistent with their contract terms. So some examples of this include kindergarten readiness assessment, Help Me Grow, Little by Little. Additionally, the resources included in the proposed budget demonstrate that we are being very methodical in anchoring our investments on the work priorities and fiscal realities. As we maneuver the challenges to cut spending, which is never easy, in responsible ways in partnership with those impacted by changes in spending over time where possible. So an example of this partnership effort to inform future spending in alignment to the long-term financial plan is the home visiting stakeholder work group that was created by First 5 LA staff in the fall. The home visiting work group, which consisted of key county partners and grantees from all three First 5 LA funded models, provided key input that informed the development of three guiding criteria: impact, efficiency, and sustainability. So this included prioritizing geographic areas of higher need, fiscal efficiencies, performance, and sustainability to inform the budget reductions for fiscal year 25-26. So the continued stakeholder engagement is expected to help shape and inform the development of the future year's budgets. This program investment slide outlines our strategic and intentional continued investment in core programmatic areas aligned with our mission to support young children and their families. Here we can see that for fiscal year 25-26, most of our funds are expected to support existing work at a reduced investment, consistent with our fiscal realities and long-term financial plan. So although our total budget is on a downward trend, consistent with the guidance that was provided through our long-term financial plan, we are still investing in some pretty instrumental work next year. As you can see, as of today, the only project anticipated to sunset next year is Help Me Grow, with an estimated budget of $60,000 intended for final evaluation and the final report. In addition to our existing investments, we also have two investment areas that are earmarked for new work. So this includes the Equity Index to inform equitable resource allocation and policy advocacy, and a semi-new fund, the Strategic Initiatives Development Fund, which we'll explore more in a moment. But before we get into the proposed costs, I did want to review some of the logistics. So as previously mentioned, we are organizing the program budgets in a manner that is more reflective of the 2024-2029 strategic plan. These resources are organized within the 3 overarching program centers, followed by legacy investments and the Strategic Initiatives Development Fund, which is formerly our Emerging Opportunities Fund. And the support budgets or support costs are a reorganizing of our internal operations costs. And this also aligns with the organizational structure in support of the 2024-2029 strategic plan department structure. Today's presentation will review highlights of each of these components and the overall proposed resource needs for 25-26. So just to serve as a very quick reference, the materials pertaining to the cost summaries included in today's committee packet are organized according to this outline by the centers, and here you can see the various departments that are organized within the centers. So the specific line item costs in support of our operational needs are still organized within our 6 standard cost categories, and we'll review that a little later. So as you can see in this table, the proposed 25-26 budget of $80 million represents an overall decrease in anticipated spending for the year of roughly $11.7 million or 12.8% when compared to the revised 24-25 budget. So this is driven by a net decrease in total program spending, including program support, which again is the operational needs for programs. The total reduction is just under $10 million and by a decrease of approximately $1.7 million in administrative support costs, all of which we will examine a little further in today's presentation. We have again renamed Emerging Opportunities to Strategic Initiatives Development Fund and expanded the purpose and use of these funds to allow us to be nimble in addressing emerging needs or opportunities in advancement of the strategic plan goals. Additionally, the final legacy investment, little by little, is anticipated to fully exhaust its allocation in fiscal year 25-26. So as a reminder, legacy investments are investments that carried over from previous strategic plans. They do not align with the new strategic plan and they are being phased out. So our final legacy investment will be phased out next year. Following some really challenging decisions, reductions, and conversations, the end result is a budget that is guided by data, rooted in community need, and aligned with our long-term strategic goals, including an emphasis on long-term sustainability. So one example of the sustainability measures that I previously mentioned is the additional funding secured to support the work that has been identified for fiscal year 25-26. So as illustrated in these tables, the 25-26 budget is anticipated to be offset by approximately $7.6 million in other revenues, reducing the actual estimated net investment by First 5 LA from $80 million to $72.4 million. So we anticipate receiving approximately $7.6 million in other revenues in 25-26. This includes funding from partners such as the Department of Mental Health, First 5 California, and a Medi-Cal managed care plan. How we present the newly secured non-First 5 LA Proposition 10 revenue that has been included in the budget will be determined on a case-by-case basis, depending on the specific requirements or conditions that are tied to that funding. Revenues with the greatest flexibility will be directed to the fund balance. Non-First 5 LA Proposition 10 revenues with designated purposes will reflect agreements made with the original funder. In the case of DMH, as one example, the funding has historically supported home visiting. The funds that would have otherwise been dispersed by First 5 LA to support these home visiting activities will be held in reserve this year to accommodate the potential contracting needs that exceed the amounts outlined in the annual budget. while the remaining balance will be used in the future year to offset costs aligned with the original intent of the funding. So First 5LA will continue to explore and identify new public and private revenues that could support our fiscal reality and advance our strategic goals in alignment with the long-term financial plan. So as we look ahead to fiscal year 25-26, we've taken a very deliberate, focused approach to our program investments. These investments are designed to drive systems level change, advance equity, and build on learnings and our existing momentum. So drilling down further into some of our programmatic components, beginning with the Center for Family Systems and Human Resources, we are seeing an overall 18.3% net decrease in activities compared to the mid-year revised 24-25 budget. So in family supports, we're seeing an approximately 16.1% net decrease to align costs with the spending trajectory reflected in the LTFP. The reduction is partly due to the First 5 California Home Visiting Grant and Welcome Baby Impact Study ending, which completed the objectives outlined in their scope of work. So despite the reductions, the 25-26 activities will focus on identifying and implementing efforts based on pilot learnings and referral pathways, ongoing exploration of sustainability strategies, and maximizing cross-sector data use. The Family Supports Department will continue leading efforts to build and sustain an integrated home visiting system in Los Angeles County in partnership with key partners, including the Department of Public Health. Ongoing efforts to coordinate with managed care plans to support Welcome Baby and select home visiting programs will continue, as well as infrastructure support for the Family Strengthening Oversight Entity and the Stronger Families database. In addition, Family Supports is continuing to lean into sustainability through the development and expansion of partnerships such as those with the LA County Department of Mental Health and a Medi-Cal managed care plan, which will provide nearly $4.3 million in support of select home visiting costs in fiscal year 25-26. Health Systems is decreasing by approximately 53.8% due to the sunsetting of Help Me Grow LA. Next year's focus for this department will be advancing birth equity and early identification efforts. Key priorities in 25-26 will include co-leading the African American Infant and Maternal Mortality, or AIM initiative, building sustainable financing structures, and engaging Medi-Cal managed care plans to further prioritize prenatal to 5 populations, as well as expand access and improve outcomes. The center support is reflecting an approximately 40% net increase compared to mid-year, or a 36% net decrease compared to the 24-25 original budget due to a timing adjustment in the county partnership funds at mid-year. In fiscal year 25-26, center support will continue to focus on external partnership opportunities to strengthen service delivery and workforce support. Investments in this area support flexible engagement with public and philanthropic partners to scale impactful strategies. So moving on to the Center for Community Engagement and Policy, we are seeing an overall 15.2% net decrease in activities compared to prior year. Beginning with communities, they are decreasing by approximately 18.5%, driven by reductions across nearly all of their investments, including the 5 regional networks, as well as sunsetting of the Best Start Learning Agenda and the Expand Regional Influence and Impact with Data Investment. The 25-26 efforts will focus on community engagement, regional collaboration, and policy advocacy aligned with the strategic plan priorities, such as housing insecurity, poverty alleviation, and choices for healthy foods. The Communities Department will also continue strengthening the Best Start regional networks across the 5 regions to drive systems change and community leadership. Impact and accountability is reflecting a 5% net decrease, primarily due to reductions across nearly all investments and the transition of the data agenda work from external contracting to in-house management. So these reductions are partially offset by new investments in equity index and increased support for the impact framework, both of which are critical for guiding resource allocation and tracking progress, particularly as we dig into advancing the strategic plan. In the coming year, we'll focus on advancing data-driven decision-making, transparency, and equity measurement while continuing to support strategic data partnerships. These efforts are intended to strengthen internal capacity and accountability and inform broader systems change. In public policy and early care education, we're seeing a 12.9% reduction, primarily the result of reductions across many of the investments, holding 3 investments steady and sunsetting the kindergarten readiness assessment according to its contracted timeline. The public policy and early care and education team will focus on advancing legislative and regulatory changes and strengthening early childhood systems of support aligned with First 5 LA's goals. The 25-26 priorities include expanding access to affordable early learning, advocating for culturally affirming services, and supporting strategic public investments. The department will coordinate closely with internal teams and external coalitions to align policy advocacy with data and community-driven insights, and will continue to play a pivotal role in aligning systems change with the evolving local, state, and federal policy landscape. Additionally, PPECE is anticipated to receive First 5 California funds to support the work and efforts in quality rating and improvement system and Quality Start Los Angeles activities. And finally, in the Center for Strategy and Culture, we are seeing an overall 46.2% net decrease compared to mid-year. This is primarily due to the single department within that center, programmatic department, which is communications. They are reducing costs by approximately 46.2% due to the reassessment and refinement of costs and targeted approach to support the organization's internal and external marketing, communications, and collaboration needs. To maximize resources and to advance a more effective and efficient investment strategy, the First 5 LA Communications Department will further refine focus on aligning strategies, needs, and efficiencies of the organization by holding the whole across our initiative areas to advance progress to address the objectives in the 2024-2029 strategic plan. So communications will also play a critical role by developing and promoting narrative change on behalf of the organization, utilizing asset-based language and centering equity and racial justice to advance the goals and the objectives of the strategic plan. Activities included in the budget extend across initiatives and are intended to continue to enhance visibility, advocacy, and strategic engagement, as well as explore innovative communication strategies and opportunities for additional partnerships. These investments represent our values in action. And although they are reduced, they are aligned, intentional, and impact focused. They build on where we've been and move us toward where we're going. And speaking of where we're going, the Strategic Initiatives Development Fund is an expanded version of the previous Emerging Opportunities Funds, which was established to help us become responsive to any emerging needs. The Strategic Initiatives Development Fund takes that one step further and is intended to fund costs associated with developing new initiatives, new strategies, and projects that align with the objectives that are set forth in the strategic plan. So this includes, but is not limited to, research and analysis for new initiatives. So that's the data gathering, pilot programs or prototypes that support strategic goals, hiring staff and or external consultants with specialized expertise to address gaps in the organizational needs. Forming strategic partnerships or collaborations to advance organizational objectives, and acquiring technology or tools that enhance new strategies and support the new tactics. So we have approximately $4.8 million included in the 25-26 budget to fund these evolving needs in alignment to our strategic plan priorities. So moving on to a discussion of our support costs. This includes the administrative support and programmatic support as indicated in the first top table. Although this year we are presenting the internal support costs with a little more specificity, delineating between the costs in service of administrative versus programmatic functions. These costs are still reflective of the resources required to fund personnel, supplies and services, utilities, equipment costs, and the general operational needs to successfully do the work. In these tables, you can see that the total overall cost proposed for our support costs is approximately $1.3 million less than the total included in the 24-25 mid-year revised budget, from roughly $21.7 million in 24-25 to a proposed $20.4 million for fiscal year 25-26. So the net decrease is primarily driven by reductions across most cost categories, except for slight upticks in operating services due to increasing licensing costs for existing systems and travel expenses due to continued prioritization of public policy and advocacy related work and anticipated increased travel to Sacramento and Washington, D.C. in service of this work. The proposed budget to support personnel costs developed in collaboration with the Human Resources Department includes 95 full-time equivalents, so 95 full-time staff, scaled down from 105 FTE in 24-25 with the elimination of 10 formerly vacant positions. The 95 full-time staff includes 78 filled positions as of March 2024, 8 priority hires and 8 vacant positions, with 3 of those 8 vacant positions housed within the human resources budget, pending the tactics implementation to assess and redirect these positions to the area of greatest needs within the organization. The benefits for the vacant positions were calculated at the single employee average salary rate. We have also included a 2.5% salary adjustment for all positions, and there is no attrition included in this year's personnel cost calculation as we've included in the past. So we will continue to analyze, assess, and refine our approach to ensure that resources are appropriately captured, fairly distributed, and accessible across the organization. So although we are presenting the support costs or operational costs a little differently this year, the development of the support budget is consistent with the practice of developing these costs in prior years. And these costs are informed by the alignment of our staffing needs to our strategic direction and goals, our fiscal reality, historical expenditure trends, existing contract information, anticipated expenditures, both one-time and ongoing, and the timeline of costs and activities. So looking a little more closely at the administrative costs, as noted here and in the tables that we just reviewed, of the $20.4 million proposed in support costs, both administrative and program, the administrative cost for fiscal year 25-26 represents roughly $12.7 million or 15.8% of our total budget for fiscal year 25-26. Our administrative cost policy dictates that we adopt an administrative limit each year, but unlike other commissions, the policy does not specify a specific percentage for First 5 LA. The current policy calculation methodology includes all administrative department costs, as well as costs to support the executive department, the board, and the communications support costs, as well as 65% of all salary and benefit costs for the 2 program vice presidents, program directors, and their administrative support staff. The 65% administrative cost was determined through a high-level time allocation survey administered in August 2024, which Raul mentioned earlier. And this found that at that moment in time, 65% of program leadership's time was dedicated to administrative function, and approximately 35% of their time was dedicated to programmatic functions. So this distribution may change in the future, as we explore a more nuanced approach with which to revisit the administrative cost methodology and track time distribution. However, we do endeavor to maintain an appropriate ratio of administrative costs to program costs. And in accordance with the administrative cost policy, a schedule that documents administrative cost components and calculations is included in today's materials. Any future changes proposed to the administrative cost policy will be shared with the board for review and approval. So we will pause here. This is the end of the first part of today's presentation, which is the budget. And we will pause for questions.
So I would like to note a couple of things. For tomorrow's presentation, we will be going deeper into each of the programs. So please note that at tomorrow's presentation, it's going to be a little bit longer than today, because spend some time into the program. And then around the administrative cost limit, I just really want to emphasize what a huge, this is a win for the organization. For many reasons. Doing a time survey and really understanding what the true admin cost is extremely important for an organization, especially when we are expanding into looking at sustainability and chasing other resources to help facilitate our resources. The reason why is a lot of funders like the feds or even local entities and state entities are always looking at administrative costs. So the more that we can really fine tune what our real administrative cost is, the better we are situated when we're looking for newer funding. In addition, the average, just doing an analysis of the first 5 network, we're coming in at around 15.69%. The average is 15.24. Starting with the very small the smaller counties are up to 25%, which other county, and it goes down to 8%. So being in that 15 to 16% range is right in the middle. So we are really situated in a very good place for administrative cost. And when we compare ourselves to like the county departments, we're much lower. So we're in a very good position. So just wanted to note that and call that out for you committee members. So with that said, I know we're going to be losing a member soon, so I want to make sure we cover any questions around the budget before we move to the LTFP, which is really the LTFP is just an update to the October presentation.
Commissioners, are there any questions? Commissioner?
So, thank you for this presentation. I found it very helpful. I do like that the change in the budget structure to really look at programmatic and administrative makes more sense to me. That's how we operate our budgets. It's how we operate our contracted providers budgets. So that actually aligns better. I was wondering if First 5 California has any guidance around the maximum amount of an administrative piece.
No, the management guide provides you guidance on how to, what work to put into program, what work to put in administrative function, and even actually extrapolates even research and evaluation as a third component. We have elected to combine both the program and evaluation together, but it doesn't set a limit. It's really up to each of the county commissions to establish their own policy. Our own policy, we don't set a limit. We come back to the board with a proposed rate for that fiscal year, and then we monitor to that dollar amount. That year.
The other thought I had was around the decrease in the communication budget by almost half. At a time when we're trying to really make public this new strategic plan and reach those who will need these resources, apparently increasingly more than ever, given the day-to-day stuff happening. I'm just, that really struck me as a big decrease. I'm wondering, since the communication will no longer be at a countywide level, the decision making around how the communication will be intentional.
Yeah, I can answer that, Dr. Bird. You'll hear also probably the same talking points for tomorrow as well. What's behind that for sure, definitely a big decrease. It is a focus on more cost efficiency aligning to the strategic plan. If you recall from even Daisy's presentation in front in terms of new work and what's continuing, that work actually is in the middle where it's continuing but evolving due to the fiscal reality for that. It's not going to be a decrease of our communication impact. That is the whole point of this for sure. It's trying to have better alignment, better efficiencies. In addition to that, and shed some more light for this tomorrow, we are going to try to look for opportunities where we can leverage other communications channels with our partners so that we won't be duplicating efforts. As long as these messages are aligned to our strategic plan, we'll try to look for those opportunities which will help be more cost efficient for this.
Thank you very much.
Can I add one thing to JR's point also? It was looking at some social media contracting, so we're looking to leverage other partners that are conducting social media, so it doesn't take away the narrative of the asset building and it connects it to initiatives. So the efficiency and not inconvenience is really.
Commissioner Cortez. I was just wanted to clarify, there was, and thank you again for this is so detailed, and I appreciated all the in-depth breaking down of visually what's being spent on whom and what spaces. On the one slide, I think that you said that this looks different from ours, what we have. There was something I think previously about 8 open hires and 8 priority hires. And so I was just kind of wanted to clarify, because I just want to make sure that that's very clear even tomorrow in the public meeting. If we're cutting back on all of these spaces, which I think is really important, why we're still hiring new people, and I'm sure they are necessary and needed, but I just want to make sure. I don't know how to, I know that there's, you all are conveying very clearly what the numbers are and what's going to be needed, but maybe just a notation of like what that's going to be, and if maybe that's already included in your presentation.
Can I just add one thing to this? It's, the math for me is not working, because if you have 78 filled positions and 8 priority and 8 vacant, that's 94.
Yeah.
But I think you said it's 95 full-time. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
It's actually 9
9.
priority hires.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
It's
Good catch.
more big, yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you for the presentation. Just 2 thoughts. One on the strategic initiatives development fund. I think that's really wise. We certainly need to be able to pivot right now. But just also think about, like, in terms of your bullets, like, could some of it be available to like community organizations who are gonna lose like infrastructure? Like, there's a lot of shuffle in across multiple funders right now. So just to really call that out, that would be a really interesting use for that. And it's a small, relatively small investment that the organization can stabilize. Because, you know, as we know, like, we're like, oh, we can't fund you this year, but we'll be back. Like, that really just, you know, destroys infrastructure. It takes a long time to come back. And then this is like totally, I don't understand that, but when you said time study, it triggered me because we do that. We do Medi-Cal administrative cleaning, Medicaid and
Yeah,
mom.
mom,
I personally have started, like, we're really looking at quite painful, but it's important because, it's so much of what we do. I imagine it's a lot of what you do. It's definitely a lot of what your contractors do. And every first five is set up differently within a county authority. I don't know how that works now. You know, I would have to investigate that. I think public health is actually the authority for the county. You know, it's just like one department. So just to think about that as like a revenue opportunity, because it's like anything that's like not Medi-Cal reimbursed, but like supports that work, which is pretty much everything you do. Yeah, it's just like a revenue opportunity that we're looking at. We do in public health, we're looking to expand it, just to, I don't know if you're eligible even, but just.
we are eligible, and actually, we used to have, MOD dollars coming in. Unfortunately, a lot of those programs that we were funding that did those Medi-Cal activities, administrative activities, those programs have sunsetted, so the level of the activities that we're funding has decreased. But there are opportunities for us to be looking at.
What about you? So like I do administrative activities and I can bill my time, like not, I'm, you know, doing direct services. So could, just for an administrative standpoint, like contract management, administration, program planning and design. Again, I'm triggered because I'm looking at these codes all the time right now, but like these, just for your staff and how, just to, I don't know if that's
Yeah,
allowable.
I don't think those,
That's not
that wasn't allowable, because, yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
We do something similar.
Yeah, because we have like, because I'm on local, like it depends like your, what your salary source is, if it's local revenue, non-federal, it's possible, so just to think about that.
Yeah. yeah, it used to be, I think it is under DPH now.
Still, yeah. What
Yeah,
about
it used to be under the CEO's office, and then they, I believe it was this, was it the CEO.
Yeah, we're the local
But now it's-
authority,
yeah.
and so, but many county departments
Yeah.
participate. And, just something
Yeah.
to think about, and
Yeah,
contractors.
and there's only 3 LGAs within the county of Los Angeles.
Yep.
Long Beach, Pasadena,
Okay.
and the county.
Any other questions from commissioners? I had similar questions, especially about the communications piece, that was big reduction, but I understand the rationale now. I do also think that that's gonna be the biggest hurdle. We have this beautiful strategic plan that really affirms our position in supporting families and children, but at the same time, there are these big reductions in the spending. So I think there's gonna be a need for a strong effort to align the messaging in a way where I can look at the budget and still see the language of the strategic plan, if that makes sense. Because even like as we're going through the budget, and I've seen this a couple times now, I've had to open up the strategic plan, the one slide that has the goals, initiatives, strategies and tactics. And I also had opened the slide deck for tomorrow, just to see, since you mentioned this is gonna be a little bit different. And you did break apart the Center for Community Engagement policy slides, the breakdown of the. And there is an asterisk next to communities, which calls out the 13 to 14% reduction. And so I think, I get it. I'm in this space, in this room, having these conversations, but to the outside community, it's gonna be a little bit more difficult to reconcile the fact that we have that brilliant strategic plan with the big lofty goals of reducing, poverty for children. At the same time, cutting, funding for the regional grantees, which are right in their communities. That's what they're familiar with. A lot of these families may not be familiar with First 5 LA, but they know those regional grantees who are in their community. So that's my biggest concern, is how do we communicate that to the people that are receiving these services? And I know this is what we have to do, like these cuts. I mean, there's no way around it, but it's just communicating that to families and allowing ourselves to have a clear understanding of how the strategic align is still visible in the budget. And I don't know if that's hearing more from the programs on what these numbers actually mean when there's a 15% cut. What does that actually translate to with that specific program? And I personally would benefit from hearing more of that. And then I do wonder if, you know, if there's discussion around, I don't know, like finding someone at the New York Times who can amplify this, because they're paying attention to what's happening in LA County, and we're serving more children 0 to 5 than anywhere else in the state of California. And in order to get ahead of the narrative that may come out as the budget becomes, you know, more difficult to manage, with the shifts, especially after the state's budget is approved and the federal cuts become realized. I think it's important for us to get ahead of that. And there's a lot of building that's gone into it, so I don't know if there's a question in there, but I just wanted to share that. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It's becoming clear to me, but I agree. The biggest hurdle is going to be how we align our goals with the community vision as well and their needs, so that we don't look like we're just backing up entirely. And so I think that we do need more to look at more effective communication, and then again, to align it so that we look like what we believe, that we're still on task in terms of serving the communities adequately. So I do thanks. Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, so I actually, something you said actually really struck me, because a lot of our mental health services act funding that we give to our provider communities through whatever, either contracts or solicitation grants, whatever. We actually ask them to be consistent in their branding of that's Prop 63 funding, that's MHSA funding, right? I think that to the extent you can have that simultaneous communication with all of your partners, that this is a First 5 LA and a SSG project, right? So that First 5 LA is on all of those community providers branding, and as budget roller coasters happen, they immediately start thinking, oh, we need to be advocating for First 5 LA.
And just a couple of comments. Thank you, Commissioner McBride and Commissioner Segala for that. And yeah, to agree where there's looks like to be a decrease there, and then in the meantime, we're decreasing funding for the community. Yeah, just keep in mind that was the strategy behind the LTFP to bring that stability there. So that was there. So we're definitely, as best as we can, trying to be proactive, and with your guidance, if we got there. So that's kind of the end game of where we want to be. So we have stability for the community partners. In addition to the communications, loud and clear, what you mentioned there. As Daisy mentioned in role, we do have that strategic initiative development fund there. So the thought there, if you recall from Daisy, that is a place where we can leverage for new work. And that new work could inform what we do for communication. So I want to say that will be an opportunity to use that funding for there, but that's a place that we could perhaps leverage that budget for any additional communication needs, should there be one.
I would also like to add, ever since Proposition 31 and the elimination of flavored tobacco products, the communication department has been extremely proactive in communicating to our partners about our revenue and the fluctuation in our revenue and declining revenue. And I would also say that as part of this budget and the developing of this budget, and I've been with the organization for over 20 years, there was a very proactive approach in working with our partners and grantees in strategizing how we're going to reduce funding across many of our investments. Many of our partners have really leaned into this, but I have to also acknowledge that there's some partners that are feeling the heat from what we don't know, the unknown at the federal level. And obviously they're voicing concerns, which I would say that's happening across at every level, not only for first five, but for county departments, for municipalities, most importantly for community-based organizations. So I would say that we have been proactive. But what has been like communicating to the end user, meaning are the community-based organizations communicating it to their clientele? That is an area that I think we need to look into. And there's an opportunity definitely there.
And I think it's brilliant what you said, and there's also some leverage because communicating to them that a 46% reduction in the funding for communication means that that's less of a reduction that you'll receive. Like there's still a reduction, but I'd rather see it taken from communication because these days communication can be free. Like social media is free. Like you can pump it out or at a nominal cost, but that means there is still more funding for those services. So help us help you. Be the voice. If we're cutting communications, be the voice for First Five. So I think that's brilliant.
Which leads us to our long-term financial plan.
Good plug.
It's a very good plug. So it reminds me that, and this is part of my talking points, that, you know, First Five LA, we're committed to our long-term financial plan, obviously. And while the overall fund balance will always fluctuate year to year, it is very critical that we remain focused in managing our resources and how we move forward to make sure that we're creating and ensuring stability and to maximize our impact through fiscal year 34-35. Each year we must exercise discipline. And what I mean by that is making decisions based on our long-term financial goal aligned to our strategic plan, rather than reacting to pressures, rather than reacting too quickly to unknown pressures or the current pressure and environment that we're facing today with the federal government. Which is a normal tendency for us to, you know, given the environment, we want to make sure that there's so much uncertainty. When we see that there's potential resources available, we want to be able to jump in and say, okay, maybe I can fix it. But most importantly, it's also the time for us to be making sure that we're disciplined and we're kind of being strategic on how we use our resources. So I want to make sure that when we present our long-term financial plan, that we are communicating that we are committed to our long-term financial plan. We are committed to our partners and staying the course of our long-term financial plan and the strategy, even under the current conditions and challenges that we're facing. I also want to address that the current updated long-term financial plan does show an uptick in our available fund balance. But in the last week, we have received current revenue projections that kind of tells us that we're going to be going in a different direction. So that's why it's more important for us to just stay the course with our long-term financial plan. And even though there's just so much uncertainty and funding that's going to be reduced, we can't automatically be the organization that fills in the gap. We have to be strategic on how we use our resources and make sure that our resources are aligned to our strategic plan and align and in alignment to make sure that we create stability for our partners. Because that's what our long-term financial plan does. It does create stability for our partners through fiscal year 34-35. So with that said, I'm gonna pass it to Daisy, who's gonna go into the actual numbers on where we're landing with current updates. Again, the updates that we're providing you were based on an older set of revenue projections. We are seeing a potential different story, which we will finalize and update during our audit process when we provide the actual update to our LTFP in October.
Okay, so yes, what we are presenting is the first update to the revised LTFP. And this is the revised LTFP that was presented for approval at the October 2024 meeting of the Board of Commissioners. So the purpose of the LTFP is to aid in the commission's role as financial stewards by providing a framework that shows the long-term implications of funding decisions. This revised plan provides us with an annual revenue and spending guardrails through fiscal year 34-35, and has given us a clear framework to support decisions we will need to make to get us and our grantees to a period of stability. So the current process requires that we update the LTFP estimates to capture the updated revenue forecasts, most recent audited financial statements, balance, the mid-year revised estimates, and the estimated expenditures for the proposed draft budget. This update to the LTFP is based on changes to revenues for the plan period and expenditures for fiscal years 23-24 through 25-26. That was all grounded in new information. So this graph, which should be familiar to many of you, illustrates the effect of revenue and expenditure decisions, actual and projected, through fiscal year 34-35. First 5 LA's funding, which relies heavily on Proposition 10 tobacco tax revenue, continues to decline as smoking rates drop statewide. So while this trend reflects progress in terms of the general public health, it also presents an ongoing challenge to our financial sustainability. In prior years, the commission made intentional decisions to use our fund balance to invest in strategic long-term initiatives in support of our mission. As a result, expenditures have exceeded revenues for several years. This was by design, where we were using our fund balance to offset the difference. In recent years, we've shifted toward aligning expenditures more closely with our declining revenue, reflecting our commitment to responsible fiscal stewardship. Moving forward, projections show a continued controlled use of the fund balance in fiscal year 25-26. And looking ahead, projections from 25-26 onward show expenditures will continue to exceed revenues for a short period before expenditures level off, with spending projected to stabilize at $60 million over 8 years, beginning in fiscal year 27-28, indicating a planned and responsible use of the fund balance to support ongoing impact.
I just want to make a quick announcement. We no longer have quorum, so we won't be able to continue conducting business because we no longer have 5 commissioners here, voting members. My apologies for the abrupt interruption. I'll hand this off to the team to see how we want to proceed in ending the meeting, wrapping it up.
So did Carol leave?
She stepped out, but that's only for voting members.
Can we do just high level bullet points of what will be covered tomorrow as a summary, which is in writing, so shouldn't interrupt quorum.
And then we refrain from asking any questions or giving any feedback.
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so Linda, for purposes of the meeting, you should mark it as having ended
Yes.
at this point, right? And so,
Yes,
yes,
that's correct.
commissioners, this is just, staff can just really briefly finish up, but there can be no more discussion. Otherwise, this would be, trying to have a meeting outside of a quorum.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarita. So we should officially adjourn at 3:30.
That is correct. That brought down the 3:30 as a turn.
Okay, so just very quickly,
Should I stop the stream?
can we still use it?
We can.
We can still
this
use
is
it.
Sarita's on, but this is no longer a meeting, so we've made a note of it. We should cut the YouTube. Okay. We can cut the Zoom and the YouTube, but we have to keep Sarita. We're just.
We'll have to, ooh, that's would be tough.
But we are stopping the public